With Dragon Ball Daima having come to an end, the community stands rather divided to say the least. The retcons, the plot devices, the debate on whether Daima is canon to Super, you name it. After waiting for a bit to allow everyone to let the ending really sink in, I decided I wanted in on this, so I have made my own review of Dragon Ball Daima based on my personal feelings regarding the show. I don't have the most time to spend on this video, so the editing will likely be minimal, but that's beside the point. So, about Dragon Ball Daima, how would I rate it out of 10? Personally, I loved the absolute shit out of Daima even with the flaws it has, so I'm giving it a solid 8.8 out of 10. Daima was to me exactly what Dragon Ball desperately needed. A break from the constant barrage of fights. As some of you may know, I grew up with the original Dragon Ball and not necessarily Dragon Ball Z. So I grew up with the mystical adventure taking the lead alongside the awesome fights, of course. Z and Super honestly made the adventure and story aspects take the back seat for the fights. Which is fine in its own way, but I definitely miss the adventure part of the franchise in those two installments. Daima really hit a soft spot with me personally by actually focusing on the adventure part of the story for a good part of the entire anime. I've seen people complain there were too few fights, but I just think that's an effect of Super, to be honest. Because Super kind of put the story on the back burner to just focus on fights alone, and many younger fans probably grew up with more Super and Z than I did, for example, right? But in terms of fights, we've had Goku versus the Gendarmerie soldiers, Goku versus Glorio, Goku versus King Kadan soldiers, Goku versus Tamagami 3, Vegeta versus Tamagami 2, Ku versus Tamagami 1, Do versus Tamagami 1, Vegeta versus Goma, literally everyone versus Goma, Goku versus Goma. Saying that there were no fights in Daima is just straight up not true, but Daima was easily my most liked installment of Dragon Ball by far, you know, aside from the original Dragon Ball. If I had to personally rate them, I would probably go something like Dragon Ball Daima, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, Dragon Ball GT, and like at the bottom of the barrel Dragon Ball Heroes, but I think that's a pretty common opinion. But again, this list was just my opinion, right? No shade towards people who don't like that ranking. But Daima is definitely not without any flaws. The biggest complaint I have with it is that it was just compressed into just 20 episodes. Even just 4 or maybe 6 more episodes to turn it into a longer seasonal anime could have made things feel less rushed in the end. And given them more time to explain stuff and, you know, just pace the story out a tiny bit more, because admittedly it did feel a bit rushed, but what do you expect from just 20 episodes, right? But by far the biggest thing that I've seen that is making people dislike Daima is the whole canon stuff regarding its connection to Super. Just a little reminder for you guys, Daima takes place a bit after the gang has defeated Kid Buu at the end of the Buu saga, so chronologically it takes place before the events of Battle of Gods and Dragon Ball Super. There are certain things in the show that make connecting Daima to Super pretty much impossible. Vegeta going Super Saiyan 3, or as he calls it, Ultra Vegeta 1, Goku already knowing he had Super Saiyan 4 in him as he revealed during the finale of Daima, and Shin and Kibito being unfused during the events of Daima are already 3 things that make Daima being canon to Super pretty unlikely to say the least. But if you ask me, people should just not think that hard about it, if that makes any sense. I mean, canon has always been a major point of frustration in Dragon Ball in general. Super takes place before GT on the timeline, but we don't see Goku going Ultra Instinct against Omega Shenron, for example. Now, I am a big fan of just considering Daima as Toriyama's version of GT, and considering it a separate canon after Z. We have to remember we are talking about Toriyama here. His personal views on what is canon and what is not canon are not nearly as rigid as the actual fans who watch the show. To quote a couple of things he has stated before, regarding the Dragon Ball movies, Toriyama had the following to say: "I take the movies as stories in a different dimension from the main story of the comic. I'm entirely just an audience member for them." And the source of this is an interview in Daisenju 6. And on the topic of GT, he had this to say: "Being a lazy bum by nature, I was absurdly happy when I managed to safely finish up Dragon Ball serialization and finally be released from Deadline Hell. The TV anime people wanted to continue for just a little bit more, but I just couldn't do any more of that, and so I left the Dragon Ball anime completely up to the anime staff, story and all. That was Dragon Ball GT. Dragon Ball GT is a grand side story of the original Dragon Ball, and it'll make me happy for us to watch and enjoy together." And the source of this is the Dragon Book from GT. In Toriyama's own views, stuff like GT and the movies in Z just exist in their their own little separate timelines / dimensions. So what is the big issue with Daima being the same thing? There is no reason why Daima needs to connect to Super. It's fine being its own little story in its own little timeline. Just like how GT is its own timeline separate from the main canon. And even if you really want to connect the two franchises, I guarantee you they can do it if they want. They will just have Goku go, oh man, I need to ask Ku if he can help us with this, or oh no, the Potara are crushed and Vegeta's arms are broken so we can't fuse. Guess I'll have to use those bugs I bought back then, remember guys? Or even, oh, Super Saiyan 4, I completely forgot I could do that. In the end, it's Dragon Ball writing we're talking about here guys, so it's probably not that deep and it's probably not a good idea to really just get, held up on that too much. But enough about the whole canon debate. I think I've made my views on that pretty clear. But another thing people just can't seem to get enough of hating on is the concept of the fusion bugs being introduced in episode 4, I believe it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. But people were convinced we would 100% get a fusion because these things exist. And do you know what we call that? We call that reaching. Just follow me for a second there. In Daima, we could have gotten a Potara fusion since Shin could give them his Potara earrings. Any of them could have done the fusion dance. Piccolo could have absorbed Never. There you go, just 3 possible fusion options already that were literally right there in the entire story the entire time that they were available, right? And why would they even introduce the concept of fusion bugs, you ask? Because in my opinion, if the Yardrats have a method of fusion, the Glint have a method of fusion, and the Namekians have a method of fusion, why would another method just not exist? I personally think people just jumped in way too fast without considering the possibility of Toriyama just going, man, wouldn't it be cool if fusing and senzu beans and stuff were like bugs you could buy in this world. They probably just included them as a nod to fusion and possibly as a distraction to Super Saiyan 4 making an appearance. Toriyama did always like to, have a little bit of a troll, a bit of a gag thing in there from time to time, so I think people were just reaching too deep from the very beginning, which is never really a good idea when you're talking about Dragon Ball because, you're kind of setting yourself up to be disappointed. But my honest opinion is that most of the people that truly dislike Daima only do so because they are too obsessed with the whole canon timeline of Dragon Ball, so much to the point that they can't just simply enjoy the show. Does Daima connect to Super well? No, it does not. Does that matter? Not at all, at least to me, right? I have always viewed the movies, GT, and now Daima as just side stories taking place within the infinite timelines and universes that is Dragon Ball. Daima was a fantastic and fun installment to the world of Dragon Ball that was just a perfect match for a viewer like me. My only true complaint is that it wasn't the longest show. And I'm the type of guy that would honestly prefer them just continuing on from Daima and just kind of dropping Super because, I don't know, Super just doesn't really do it for me anymore. It's become too still, if that makes sense, because, I don't know, getting back into the whole adventure stuff with Daima really rekindled my love for what is the essence of Dragon Ball, back in the 80s, back in the 90s. I don't know, I just miss the adventure, the mystery, the actual character development in Dragon Ball Super. And it's not just like, oh, there's an enemy, okay, cool, we just beat this enemy. Oh, look, there's another enemy right away. Oh, now we beat him. Oh, look, another enemy right away. Add some spacing in there. And, don't take this as me saying, like, I don't like Super, because obviously I like Dragon Ball, I like Super as well. Stuff like Ultra Instinct, the Tournament of Power, Ultra Ego even though it's not my favorite form, actually, giving Vegeta something is something I really like. But I don't know, I just kind of like Daima more than Super, and I think it's just because I'm a massive nostalgia whore, and I just prefer the story-driven adventure part over the just endless barrage of fights that Super tends to give. But please do remember that not liking Daima is perfectly valid too. This video has just been me spewing out my own opinion after all. By no means do I want you to just start liking Daima because I said so. If you like it, I want you to like it because it's something that you yourself actually like. Daima is just a project that resonated really well with me. If it doesn't do so with you, that's totally a-okay. But this has been my opinion about Dragon Ball Daima, so be sure to let me know what you guys' opinion on the matter is, because, I'm pretty curious about how other people view Daima as part of the Dragon Ball intellectual property. And with all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching today's video. As per usual, I truly do appreciate every single viewer that takes the time out of the day to watch my content. It makes me very happy to know that even a handful of of people just enjoys the content I produce. If you would like to see more of my content in the future, please consider clicking the subscribe button and turning on all notifications for my channel. And work hard, study well, and eat and sleep plenty, and I will see you all again in the next video. Peace out.